Hello, everyone. This is Susan Gibbons, publisher of Auto Success Magazine. I wanted just to thank you today for taking the time to join us for this webinar. Today, our presenter is John Ruble. John is the Vice President of Strategic Accounts at Conversica. He is based in Foster City, California. John has published articles about artificial intelligence and has spoken at several conferences on the subject. Prior to joining Conversica as Vice President of Strategic Accounts, John spent 2 years with Shift Digital working on its OEM consulting arm. He is an expert in marketing and retention. And I can tell you, folks, this guy knows his stuff. This presentation will help you navigate through your leads and determine which are most qualified for your dealership. We have a lot of really good information to share with you guys today. But before we get started, I want to just go over a few housekeeping things with you. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please type them in. We're going to hold all the questions till the very end, but the way that you ask a question varies depending on the device you are using. If you're using a laptop, desktop, or tablet, there will be a GoToWebinar frame on the right side of your screen. Near the bottom, it'll say questions. Just click on that triangle to the left, and it'll open a box. Type your question, hit enter, and your question has been submitted. Now, if you guys are on your mobile device, they're all just a little bit different. You will either have a header, a footer, or a picture frame around your screen. Somewhere on there, you will see a question mark. Touch that, and it will open up for you to type the question. Sometimes you can swipe to go back to the webinar, or you will have to look for a second icon that kind of looks like a flat screen television, and that will bring you back to the webinar too. Now, for any reason, you click on the wrong button or you get kicked out of the webinar, use the same link or number that you used to join us. It will bring you right back to the webinar. A couple more things I wanted to mention just before we get started. If you haven't been to autosuccessonline.com lately, we have tons of new content on the website. So once you're there, you can view past magazines, the current issue, sign up for our e-newsletter, listen to podcasts, view blogs. You can also see any future information about future webinars, or you can view past webinars. So now, with that being said, I would like to get this presentation started. John, my friend, take it away.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks everybody for jumping on today. I do hope that some of you will start asking questions early so we can have a good Q&A at the end. And let's just go ahead and get started and talk about really what can pizza teach you about lead providers. And the next couple of slides might be a little cheesy, but it's a good visual as to kind of the content of what we're talking about today. At the end of the webinar, we're also going to talk about the lead provider awards that we just announced about 2 weeks ago and share those results with everybody on the line. To kind of give you a good idea of what we're seeing in the marketplace from lead providers. One of the cool things about Conversica is we process millions of leads annually, not only in automotive, but other verticals. So we can collect some really good data that kind of helps us find out, what's going on with lead providers and some new ways to look at, are they good sources? Are we getting the best bang for our buck? So back on the pizza analogy, when we do order a pizza, we expect to get the whole pizza every time. Well, with our lead providers, do we have that same expectation? If we buy 100 third-party leads, or if we generate, 100 leads from our own website with SEO and SEM, what is our expectation? We'd love to be able to talk to every one of those leads, but that's just not the case in today's environment. So today we're going to talk about how to identify lower funnel lead sources, but also take some of the responsibility of getting these leads engaged with our dealership personnel. And hopefully I can give you some tips on how to increase that engagement percentage. So again, when you look at your lead providers, this graphic is a pretty good indicator of a better lead source versus kind of a halfway, performing lead source. And then obviously the last one with no pizza, not such a great lead source. So again, just a visualization. Sorry, it's cheesy, like I said, but again, it kind of sets the frame for what we're talking about today. Before we do get started, though, I'd like to push out a poll question just to kind of see a little bit more about the audience. And really, we're only going to have one question today, and it's just, do you have a BDC or not? So We'll give you kind of a minute here to answer the question, then we'll move on. Michael, are you able to push that out? All right, Michael, for some reason I'm not seeing the poll results. Can you share verbally what the results were?
I can tell you that 64% said yes, they do have a BDC, and 36% said no.
Okay, perfect. That's kind of what we expected. A lot of what we're going to talk about today would apply to a BDC or not having a BDC, so we're good either way. That was really just kind of a question to kind of see what's going on out there in dealerships. We see that number fluctuate. We see BDCs come, go back. So, you know, as a dealer, we have to ask ourselves, why do we commit to a BDC and then pull back on one and then maybe restart a BDC? So I think some of the results, some of the data we talk about today, and maybe some of the best practices will help with that question. So thank you, everyone, for answering. So when we talk about lead providers and measuring the effectiveness of those lead providers, you know, the questions that we ask ourselves is, you know, what makes a great lead provider? Typically, the answer to that is somebody that gives me a good lead, right? But what is a good lead? It's a lead that's lower funnel, closer to, you know, the shorter end of the sales cycle, and it's a lead that's willing to talk to somebody at the dealership. Are all lead providers the same? I think we know the answer to that. No, they're not. But depending on what the cost of those lead providers are, we're okay with a lower performing lead provider. So you just really have to kind of measure, you know, the bang for the buck, if you will. And then, you know, are we able to measure the true cost of a lead? I don't think we do a great job of that in our industry. I think we could do better, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at some new KPIs, maybe some new ways of looking at our lead providers and the individual leads. And we're really going to talk about what is the data that we're missing to find ELC. Now, ELC is what we call effective lead cost. And we'll get more into that, but as we go through this, just remember ELC is effective lead cost. So the typical formula that we use in most dealerships is, you know, how many number of leads did I get? How many appointments did I set? How many of those appointments showed? And how many of those were sold? But we're missing some information to really find out what that lead provider's given us. So I would say after number of leads, we should really add engagement. And we'll talk more about engagement on the next slide. But that's really one of the big ones that's missing is how many of those customers will enter in a two-way conversation with an employee of the dealership. So really, we talk a little bit about engagement being one of those critical missing pieces. The other one that we want to talk about is your HCC, or your human capital cost. Now, those of you with a BDC have a little bit higher capital cost, and we'll talk about how to calculate that into our lead providers. And then spam is always an issue, but I want to try to quantify what does that do to our dealership and maybe some ways to lower our spam rate. For those of you that do track spam rate, if you're sending multiple emails out, your spam rate changes by which email you sent. So it's a moving target. It's hard to track. So we just have to make sure that we have best practices in place to try to eliminate that. And again, taking that responsibility of, hey, I got a good lead, I want to make sure that that customer sees what I sent them, if it's an email, or if I'm just leaving voicemails and not talking to the customer, that's not really an engagement. So with our dashboard and the dealers that use our solution, we provide engagement percentage by lead provider. So each one of these is a different lead provider. And off to the right, you'll see the engagement percentage that, and this is only by email, each lead provider gives us. So if we get, in this case, the first one, 55 leads from lead provider A, those leads engage at about a 25%, versus somebody down below that's at 66%. It's pretty obvious that there's a difference in engagement and probably quality of lead. And we'll get more into that as we go through the webinar. So to get your effective lead costs, we're going to talk about how to do the formula. There's a couple different ways. You can do it by per lead. Probably the easiest way is to take your total spend on a particular lead provider. Let's call it $5,000. And let's say you get 200 leads out of that and only 50 of those leads engage. You have to divide the 50 into your total cost to get your effective lead cost. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, if there are any questions, please type a question. We'll handle it at the end. So example one is lead source one charges $30 per lead. That source engages. And again, engagement is not I left a voicemail or I sent an email or they opened my email. Engagement is that customer had a conversation either by email, text, or phone with an employee of the dealership. So this source engages at 50%, which equates to an effective lead cost of $60 per lead. You're really spending $60 to talk to a customer or a prospect. If we start looking at our lead providers in this way and holding them more accountable, you can now start working on how do we get a higher engaging lead source, and then as staff at the dealership, how do we engage more of the leads on our end? Lead source 2 charges the same amount per lead, but that source only engages at 33%, a third. Well, that effective lead cost is now $90 per lead. So again, a different way to look at it, but it's the right way to look at it. So the second piece that we're missing is what is our human capital cost? And there are a lot of variables to this, but I'll keep it pretty simple. You have a BDC, let's say like 60-some% on the phone do. Each rep handles 150 leads per month at a human capital cost of $4,000 per rep. And that's $4,000 including what you pay them, benefits, cost of their space, tools, computers, all that. Now your expense per lead is $26.67 based off that math. So when lead source C from the previous slide charges $30 per lead and engages at 20%, the ELC is $150 plus your human capital cost of $26.67. So your true ELC, your bottom line ELC is $176 per lead that will talk to the dealership. So when we look at a lead source and think, hey, we're only paying $30 a lead, but in actuality, you're spending close to $200 per lead, that makes you look at that lead provider completely differently. So, 200 leads purchased from lead source C looks like this. And again, very simple math. You got 200 leads at 30 apiece. That's $6,000 raw cost of the lead, plus your human capital costs is another $5,000 for a top line cost of $11,000 for that source. If that source is only engaging, 60 leads, you divide that 60 into the 11,334 to get your true cost per lead effective. And again, hopefully that makes sense. If not, drop a question in and we'll talk about it. One thing to note, regardless of the engagement percentage, your HCC or your human capital of 2667 remains the same for all lead providers. So this is where we want to focus on what can we do at the dealership to engage our lead sources at a higher rate, and also maybe focus a little differently on each lead provider, and maybe automate some of those lead providers if they're engaging super low, but it's a cost-effective lead. So again, just a new way to look at it. So now that we've kind of discussed that, going back to the previous slide, here's a great example. This is from a real dealership. If you look over to the left, we've got 52 leads from one source, 57 leads from another source, so very comparable in volume. But the percentage of customers that will engage is radically different. This provider only engages at about 34%. This provider engages at 61%. Now if you lay over your close rate for those two lead providers, you can get a whole nother set of data. Let's say the one that's engaging super high at 61% actually has a lower closing rate. Well, that's a red flag that we need to investigate at the dealership. And when you start digging, it may be incentives might be causing that. It might be a subprime source that they're just hoping to get done, and it's a high engaging source. It might be an inventory issue. But at least now that measuring this engagement percentage against your close rate now gives you some flags or some additional things to investigate to find out what truly is going on. So very useful data. This information that we provide is very difficult for a dealership to do on their own. And the biggest problem with that is how we define a contact customer and engaged customer. In many CRMs out there, if you mark left a voicemail, that's considered contacted. So when you run your reports, you're going to get a much higher or a very inflated contact rate. It's not true engagement. So unless you have a separate field in your CRM, or you have your CRM provider put a field in that said, hey, I really did talk to this customer and engaged with this customer, you're going to manually have to audit your lead sources to figure out what the engagement percentage is by source. So what does engagement tell us? Some of this is pretty intuitive. Higher engaging lead sources are providing a better lead, a lower funnel lead. And that's really what we want. We want a customer that's ready to talk and ready to buy. Poor engaging lead sources are eating up your human capital costs. I think we know that, but we really need to start looking at, if you do spend the money or invest in a BDC, how do we get a bigger bang for our buck out of our people? When we look at human capital costs, those people need to be talking to customers. They don't need to be sending a million emails or leaving a million voicemails. So let's look at our strategies and tactics on how we can get them connected with our prospects. The other thing about a poor engaging source is it damages the perception of your team, obviously wasting valuable time that they could be working on lower funnel leads. Hand raisers from the OEM are a great example of this. Our people tend to prejudge lead sources, so they may not put as much effort into that lead source, and unfortunately, we're losing deals because of that. It's just human nature. So what can we do? Obviously, when you now start looking at engagement percentage by lead provider, you can start moving your money around, putting more money into those lower funnel or higher engaging lead sources to get a higher close rate. So now you have the ability to sit down with your auto trader rep or whatever lead provider it is and say, hey, I bought 300 leads from you, but only 90 of them engaged. This is what you're really charging me per lead. Gives you a little negotiation leverage. Also kind of opens their eyes up a little bit as, we're giving you a lot of leads, but they may not be the best leads. Automate your lower engaging sources utilizing either artificial intelligence or a marketing automation system, whether it's ours or somebody else's. Again, putting your people in front of people that are ready to do business, and let something automate or use artificial intelligence to basically mine those customers that aren't as close to the sales cycle or that we've been having a tough time getting a hold of. Automate that process. It can be done very easily. Customers don't even know they're talking to an AI or a marketing automation program. Automation also helps scale the outreach for sources like OEM hand raisers, which we talked about a little bit earlier. The thing about automation or AI is it doesn't judge the source. It doesn't judge the individual lead. So it will pick up those buyers that our humans will just basically walk past. Again, any questions, please just drop a question in the box. Here's a big issue that affects engagement. Again, when we start looking at our leads as engaged leads or not engaged leads, what can we do in the dealership to increase engagement other than increase activity? Most of the CRMs that we use today, they're a little dated. Some of them need a refresh, but the CRMs were not meant to deliver emails. They just weren't optimized for that. Many of the CRMs that we use are actually sharing an IP address with another dealer across town or 4 or 5 other dealers. If that dealer is not using clean email content, that can actually affect your delivery rate. Some of those CRM providers have been blacklisted in the past for sending spam. Here's one that we don't talk about enough. managing the handshake between a new lead and your email provider or your CRM. And what I mean by handshake is, customer, let's say, goes to your website or maybe even a third-party website. You buy that lead. That customer has never messaged your dealership. They did do a form fill, so they showed interest. So when you email that customer, it's the first time their ISP has seen your IP address. If you're sending a video in your very first email that goes out, or a lot of marketing words, sales words, a lot of graphics, that email most likely will go into the spam box. So subsequently, any other emails that you send will end up in that same spam box or promotions tab. The best thing to do here, and again, a best practice is send text-only based emails for the first 2 or 3 outreaches to the customer, so that customer then responds. And now you've got a handshake and a two-way communication between the IP and the ISP. Now you can start sending the other content, videos, banners, whatever you want to send after that point. But this hygiene of our emails going out needs to be super clean in the very beginning to get that handshake. And then if you've got a spam problem, your engagement rate is going to be poor, regardless of how good the leads that email lead provider is sending you. So you might be losing 30 or 40 good leads a month, which obviously affects your effective lead cost. And again, I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Please feel free to ask any questions so we can talk about it towards the end. The other thing that we talk about a lot with automation or AI, and again, you don't have to use our solution if you use any solution, but it's the ability to scale personal outreach to really infinite number of prospects or leads and have a one-on-one conversation with each one of those lead records. It's very difficult for human staff to do that. I'll just show you an instance of a store that has been utilizing AI for about a year. 18,000 customers were messaged. It took 82,000 messages to engage those customers. So when we start looking at how much contact are we trying to make with our prospects, even hand raisers, we're probably giving up after 3 or 4 attempts. We may have some automated emails going from our CRM, but it's not personal outreach. So again, to automate it with AI or marketing automation, it appears to be a live person sending that contact, and they're persistent and consistent, but very polite. So you now have the ability, if you're a large store getting a ton of leads a month, you have the ability to scale consistent outreach to every one of your prospects without judging the source. And that's critical today when we're talking about, marketing budgets and what are we getting back, the ROI. So here's just an example of AI at work, and you'll notice the content has no graphics, no links. It does get into the inbox a lot more often than typical emails. And it's really, here's what the AI says. Hello, Christina. I've been asked to verify your contact information so James can get in touch with you. Is this your preferred number? Best regards and have a great day or a good day. Grace is actually the AI. She does have a signature, though. She's the internet sales assistant, and she is the assistant to James, who's handling this lead. Customer responds back, please feel free to text me at my cell in regards to this conversation. The customer gives a better phone number. Now we've got a handshake with this customer. This messaging looks great on a mobile device as well. So that's the first attempt to get a hold of the customer, and it worked. Our first goal when we work a lead is to get an engagement. It should be the dealership's goal as well. We can start getting fancy after we have that handshake. Earlier, I talked about scaling and persistence. The AI doesn't judge this lead. You'll see it's, there's 4 or 5 messages that are always different from an AI. Again, warm and engaging. And it shows that this dealership cares about this customer. And then the customer responded. So if this was a source that maybe our people would prejudge as a bad lead provider or a bad source, they would probably give up after 1 or 2 attempts. So again, no prejudgment from AI or marketing automation. So again, we kind of covered a lot. it's simple stuff once we start doing it on a daily basis. I do want to now go into kind of the Lead Source Performance Awards. We took all of our dealer body and pulled them and looked at their data to find the highest engaging lead providers and equity providers, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. So this was our first year doing this, and the reason we wanted to do this is kind of change the way the industry looks at lead providers, adding that engagement KPI. And that's what this whole webinar is about. From the dealer base that we do business with, the highest engaging lead providers were AutoTrader, Cars.com, and TrueCar. The dealer's choice favorite provider were CarGurus, TrueCar, and Dealer.com. Our best equity lead miners or providers were AutoAlert, TrueCar, and Dealer.com. Again, the big missing piece that we don't talk about enough is lowest spam complaint rate. Edmunds, Dealer-Centric, Auto Credit Express. Highest workable rate, AutoTrader, Edmunds, TrueCar. And then best volume, TrueCar, CarGurus, Dealer.com. A lot of these you probably are already using. I would again encourage everyone to start looking at each lead provider, put some scrutiny into, are they good leads? Are these customers ready to talk to us? Am I taking responsibility in my dealership to reduce spam rate and also increase contact attempts to increase that engagement percentage, which gives us a better effective lead cost. So at this point, we're going to turn it over. We left quite a bit of time to answer questions and hopefully make this a little bit more conversational around the content that we covered.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation, John. And yes, there are a lot of questions that have come in. So I'm just going to jump right to it so we have plenty of time to answer everything. The first question is, how does a pay per sale lead process look? This is a two-part question. Second part, would you just multiply leads worked by HCC and then the difference of profit?
That's how I would do it. And I guess I would have to have a follow-up question. When you say pay per sale, is that commission-based? If you are breaking it down that way, yeah, you have to take all those factors into account. Total spend with whatever that particular rep is handling. Really, you can even break down engagement rate by rep if they're handling similar lead flow. So I hope that answers the question. I wasn't quite sure of the question.
Okay, if that didn't answer the question, you can type a addition to that question, and I'll make sure we ask John. The next
Perfect.
question is, if you're using multiple avenues to contact customers, emails from CRM, another provider for text, and another for chat, for example, what's the best way to accurately measure engagement?
And that's the challenge, right? It's a manual process. Unless you have the ability to have your CRM provider add an additional field other than contacted, you'll have to manually audit it. If you're going to manually audit it, I would recommend doing it quarterly. If you've got that field in your CRM and your people are utilizing it properly, I would look at that weekly, just to stay on top of the quality of the lead sources.
Perfect. Can Conversica see a network as one account rooftop if we are using a centralized BDC regarding TrueCar in particular?
Yes.
Okay. Facebook Marketplace seems to be every provider's suite of products they seem to be pushing. Feedback on Facebook Marketplace for a monthly purchase.
So I think Marketplace is getting exponentially bigger and more powerful, which is cool about that medium. It's fairly new, but it's got legs. So I think it's a little early to tell, but what I've seen, and I actually met with Facebook last week in Las Vegas, they've got some pretty cool ideas. And social networking is, I hate to say it, it's probably going to be a big portion of our business within the next 12 to 18 months. I shouldn't say I hate to see it. I think it's great.
Okay. I do have a follow-up to that. The question, how does a paper sale lead process look? Would
Awesome.
you just multiply? Okay, so he said in particular, he's looking at TrueCar paper sale model.
Okay.
So I guess if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I got you. I thought you were talking about pay plan question. I guess I like the pay per sale model because you're only paying for what you sell, obviously. But are we losing other deals because the engagement isn't there? Are our people getting burned out on that lead source because they have to work every lead as if it's a buyer? So yes, I think it's a good model at the tail end. But you've got to identify what's my HCC or human capital cost in getting those sales and add that into what you're paying for the sale of the car. So there's a few more layers to that model, but you can still get there by using the formulas that we discussed today.
Okay. Next question. Do you recommend having or not having a BDC?
You know, that's one that gets asked a lot. I think if a BDC is dialed in using some of the data that we talked today about, it can be a very cost-effective way to increase sales, but it's got to be managed properly. And we've got to have KPIs in place that we look at continually to judge the success of the BDC. Now breaking down, you know, even in a BDC, you can break down effective lead costs by rep. And that's where you can really see where the dollars are being spent and where the dollars are being realized. So the answer is, I think in some cases, not having a BDC is okay, especially in a smaller store. But I've talked to dealers that say, hey, I have to have every opportunity. So I've got 2 people working in a BDC to make sure I get every opportunity. So it's really up to your team to decide if it's cost effective and you're getting an ROI out of it. But again, you've got to calculate it properly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, who are the best lead providers in your opinion?
I'm not gonna go out on that limb today. I can go back and show you what our dealer base told us. And again, much of these providers were based off of engagement rate. And again, that's kind of a new concept for many of the folks on the phone. So if you start looking at engagement percentage, this is what we found. Again, to me, the best lead provider is someone that's giving me a customer that wants to talk to me. Even if it's being sold to multiple dealers, if my team's on it, they can get that engagement before the other stores do, and I can increase my engagement percentage.
Perfect.
So some of that onus, it does fall on us, the dealer, but a majority of that lead quality is from the provider.
All right. And I have one last question. What's the best way to track engagement?
So again, if you can have, you're going to have to train your people, and you're going to have your CRM provider add that field into your dropdown, engagement or conversation, a true two-way conversation, whether it was text, email, or phone. That's the easiest way to do it. Again, if you can't get that done, do the quarterly audit, go through 100 leads, maybe 50 leads from each lead provider. It's going to take more than 100 probably, but audit it and see how do those 50 leads for the 30-day period actually engage in a two-way conversation with your team, and you'll be able to kind of scope that out on a spreadsheet.
Awesome. Well, if you've enjoyed this webinar today and you feel it's been beneficial to someone in your dealership, we have been recording it. So everyone's going to get a thank you email from me for attending the webinar. And if you would like a copy of this, just reply back and I'll make sure to get you a link so you can share it with the people at your dealership. Also, I invite you to come back for future webinars. It looks like this was jam-packed with full of information. Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much to our audience. We appreciate you guys and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.